Now that I look back, I should have seen the warning signals. However, when you're in love, your heart tends to ignore the warning signs your head attempts to send your way. This is the tale of how I got to know my husband and his family. My name is Rose. Both David and I were software developers at Tech Course Solutions. He immediately drew my attention, not just because he was attractive, but also because of his quiet confidence. In contrast to certain coworkers who were obsessed with programming, David was able to converse about other topics. He stopped by my desk one morning with 2 cups of coffee and said, "Hey, did you catch the new episode of Black Mirror last night?" It began with straightforward discussions about common interests that developed into something more. We found that we both had a bad taste in B-movies, like sci-fi programs, and went hiking on the weekends. Our brief coffee dates after work evolved into dinner dates, and our lunch breaks grew longer. It had been a year before I realized that David wanted me to meet his family. According to him, they're really down to earth. When we were driving to his mother's home, "Mom is thrilled to have met you." In addition, my sister Sarah, her husband Mike, and their son Tommy reside there. Toys were strewn all over the front yard of the modest but tidy house. Before we could knock, Sarah bounced her 4-year-old on her hip and answered the door. Finally, she cried, embracing David. "Mom, they're here." David's mother, Linda, emerged from the kitchen, smiling warmly and wearing an apron. "There's my successful son." She turned to face me after beaming and giving him a firm embrace. "And it's got to be Rose. David has told us a great deal about you." I observed their interactions throughout supper. They appeared to be a typical family, obviously pleased with David's professional accomplishments. However, I was unable to pinpoint the exact cause of the strange feeling. I didn't get the clue until Sarah mentioned Tommy's impending birthday. With her best puppy dog eyes, she remarked, "David, Tommy has been pleading for that new Nintendo game, the one with the dinosaurs." "Sarah," David began, but his mother interrupted him. "Oh, let him to give his nephew a little indulgence." Linda chuckled and patted David's hand, saying, "You're doing so well at that fancy tech company." Then, with a smile that looked to be humorous, she turned to face me. "I just hope after the wedding, he won't forget he has a mother and sister to take care of too." I assumed she was kidding, so I gave her a courteous grin. The discussion continued after everyone had finished laughing. I was unaware at the time that what she was saying wasn't a joke at all. David and I were married in a modest ceremony 6 months later. I believed we were starting our lives together in the best possible way when we discovered a lovely apartment for rent close to our place of employment. Our marriage's honeymoon period was short, literally. The inquiries began to come in as soon as we had finished unpacking from our real honeymoon. Sarah was the first to contact regarding Tommy's school supplies. Then Linda needed assistance with some repairs around the house. There was no end to the solicitations, and David would always take out his wallet without question. I initially made an effort to ignore it. David earned a respectable salary at TechCore, and the sums weren't too large. But with $100 here and $200 there, it began to seem like death by 1,000 cuts. There was a fresh emergency every week that only David could resolve. Sarah called one evening to say she needed money for Tommy's new winter clothes, so I thought we should talk. I waited until it was time for our evening ritual of washing dishes together, David and I. With deliberate word choice, I began, "Hun, can we talk about something?" His elbows were covered in soap suds as he gazed at me. "Yes, what's going on?" "It's about the money for your family." I saw a small tension in his shoulders. "Don't you think it's becoming a bit excessive?" As he wiped his hands, David's cheeks reddened with shame. Silently, I know," he muttered. I simply become used to assisting them. I've been carrying it out. But your mom has a good pension, I gently pointed out, and Sarah has Mike. Since I obtained my first job, he ought to be supporting his own family, right? David leaned on the counter and sighed deeply. Mike, well, he hasn't actually worked in over a year. What? I was drawing a plate when I almost dropped it. Why not? He consistently leaves every job he accepts. The boss is unreasonable, the commute is too lengthy, or the task is too difficult. Something is constantly wrong. Frustrated, David raked his fingers through his hair. There's always an excuse. I put the dish towel down and looked at my husband. I admire your devotion to your family, David, but we must also consider our future. We hope to own a home in the future, don't we? Have our own kids. He said, of course, and nodded. Then we need to start prioritizing our own family, I said softly, taking his hand. Supporting your mom and sister is kind, but we can't keep doing it at the expense of our own dreams. David was quiet for a long moment, absently playing with my fingers. Finally, he looked up. You're right, we should be saving for our future. What if we set up a separate savings account specifically for the house? We can put a fixed amount in there every month, no touching it for any reason. That sounds perfect. I smiled, relieved he understood. We spent the rest of the evening planning our savings strategy, and for the first time since our wedding, I felt like we were truly on the same page about our future. 2 months into our new savings plan, Linda invited us over for Sunday dinner. I had a nagging feeling about it, but David insisted we should go. They're still family, he said, squeezing my hand as we drove over. The tension was palpable from the moment we walked in. Sarah was setting the table, her movements sharp and angry. Mike was sprawled on the couch, scrolling through his phone. Linda's smile seemed forced as she hugged David, barely acknowledging my presence. The first 20 minutes of dinner were filled with awkward small talk about the weather and Linda's garden. I pushed my meatloaf around the plate, waiting for the other shoe to drop. It didn't take long. David, honey, Linda began, her voice dripping with sweetness. I noticed you haven't sent any money for the past 2 months. Is everything okay at work? The clinking of forks against plates stopped. I could feel everyone's eyes on us. David cleared his throat, and I saw him straighten his shoulders, something he always did when he was nervous. Actually, Mom, he said, his voice steady but quiet, Rose and I are saving up to buy a house. We want to start our own family soon. The silence that followed was deafening. Linda's fork clattered against her plate as she set it down, her eyes boring into me. Sarah's face turned red, and I could see the storm brewing. A house? Sarah's voice cracked. Well, I'm here pregnant with my second child, barely able to afford prenatal vitamins. Do you know how expensive baby things are these days? I felt my blood begin to boil. 2 months of biting my tongue, and I couldn't hold back anymore. Maybe your husband should think about that, I said, nodding toward Mike, who was still somehow managing to check his phone under the table. Sarah's face crumpled. How dare you? You're so cruel. The tears started flowing right on cue. You don't understand our situation. Mike finally looked up from his phone. Hey, I'm trying here. Do you know how hard it is to find a good job in this economy? I'm dealing with depression, you know. Something in me snapped. Depression didn't stop you from having another baby, did it? The room exploded. Sarah wailed louder. Mike started defending himself about his job search, but Linda's voice rose above them all. You. She pointed her finger at me, face contorted with rage. You're trying to turn my son against his own family. We were happy before you came along with your selfish ideas. Selfish? I stood up so quickly my chair scraped against the floor. Wanting to build a future with my husband is selfish. Mom, stop. David tried to interrupt, but Linda was on a roll. She's poisoning your mind against us, your own mother and sister. How dare she tell us we can't have help from our own family? I couldn't take it anymore. Without a word, I grabbed my purse and walked out. David followed close behind, and we got into the car in silence. The sound of Linda's shouts still echoed from the house as we pulled away. The drive home was painfully quiet. I watched the streetlights flash by, fighting back tears of frustration. Finally, as we pulled into our apartment complex, David spoke. "You were right," he said softly, "about everything. But maybe we need to be more gentle with them. They're not going to change overnight." I turned to look at him and saw the conflict written all over his face. Part of me wanted to argue that his family didn't deserve gentleness, that they needed a reality check. But looking at my husband's pained expression, I just nodded. The aftermath of our dinner confrontation played out in the most modern way possible, on social media. Sarah began posting daily updates that made my blood boil. Struggling to afford prenatal vitamins for my baby. Pregnant and broke. Family struggle, one post read. Another showed an empty shopping cart. Having to cut back on groceries this month. Sometimes I wonder how we'll manage with another little one on the way. The posts kept coming, each one more dramatic than the last. Pictures of Tommy looking sad beside empty toy store windows. Long paragraphs about the importance of family support. Pointed comments about some people having their priorities wrong. I caught David checking his phone constantly, his face growing more strained with each notification. One evening, after he'd been particularly quiet, I found him staring at a photo Sarah had posted of Tommy's worn-out shoes. "You can send her something," I said softly, touching his shoulder. "Small amounts, just let's keep our savings plan intact." The relief on his face was immediate. So David started sending Sarah a modest monthly amount again. Like magic, the tragic social media posts decreased, though they never completely stopped. Linda began extending dinner invitations once more, though the atmosphere was far from warm. "Would you like more potatoes, David?" Linda would ask warmly, then slide her eyes past me as if I were invisible. Sarah would only address her brother, speaking about me in the third person, even when I sat right there. "I wonder if your wife would mind passing the salt," she'd say, staring at the ceiling. I took it all in stride because, while they were busy giving me the cold shoulder, something amazing was happening at work. TechCore landed a massive contract with Global Tech, one of the biggest MNCs in the industry. David and I had both been instrumental in securing the deal, and our compensation reflected that. Suddenly, our combined income nearly doubled. Our savings account grew faster than we'd ever dreamed possible. We kept living modestly, but allowed ourselves a few luxuries. A new hybrid SUV to replace David's struggling sedan. A weekend trip to the coast here and there. As our bank account grew, so did our dreams. We started looking at real estate listings, discussing neighborhoods, and planning for our future. For the first time since our wedding, I felt like we were truly moving forward. One tense family dinner changed everything. I was quietly eating my pot roast, trying to ignore the usual cold shoulders, when Linda cleared her throat dramatically. "I saw your vacation photos on Facebook," she announced, fixing me with an icy stare. "Palm Springs, wasn't it? That resort looked expensive." I felt David tense beside me. Here we go again, I thought. "Those infinity pools, luxury spa treatments," Linda continued, her voice dripping with disapproval. "Really, David, I don't think it's appropriate to flaunt such a luxurious lifestyle when your sister can barely make ends meet with 2 children." The irony of her statement wasn't lost on me. As she spoke, the clicking of computer keys provided a steady background rhythm. Mike sat at the desk in the corner, completely absorbed in his newest video game, the third new release he'd bought this month by my count. I couldn't help myself. Speaking of making ends meet, I said, gesturing toward Mike, there are plenty of job openings in tech support at our company. The pay is good, and the benefits are excellent. The clicking stopped for a moment, then resumed even louder. Sarah's face turned that familiar shade of red. You have no idea what it's like, she snapped. Try being a mother of two before you judge us. Oh wait, you wouldn't know anything about that, would you? The barb stung, but I kept my face neutral. Mike continued playing his game, apparently oblivious to the tension in the room. Or maybe he just didn't care. I could have pointed out that being a mother was Sarah's choice, just like having a second child while unemployed was their choice. I could have mentioned that the cost of Mike's gaming habit could probably cover those prenatal vitamins she was always complaining about on Facebook. I could have started another fight. Instead, I just shook my head and took another bite of pot roast. Later that night, as David and I drove home, I thought about the monthly transfers he still made to his sister's account. The amount wasn't small. It could have furnished an entire room in our future house. However, our new salaries meant we could handle it without derailing our plans. Sometimes, keeping the peace came with a price tag, and for now, we could afford it. Meanwhile, Sarah's demands evolved from subtle hints to full-blown gift registries for every holiday. Christmas, Easter, birthdays, even Mother's Day. Yes, she expected gifts from her brother for Mother's Day, complete with a detailed list of expensive items she needed for herself and the kids. David, look at this, I said one evening, showing him the latest email from his sister. It was a Christmas list that included designer clothes, the latest iPad, and premium toys, costing more than our monthly car payment. David sighed, running his hands through his hair. I'll talk to her. This is getting ridiculous. But when he called Sarah to explain that he was already helping with monthly support, the waterworks started immediately. I could hear her shrill voice through the phone. I'll tell Mom you care more about your wife's feelings than your own family's needs. After watching David struggle through 3 such conversations, I'd had enough. One evening, while he was in the shower, I opened Sarah's latest gift requirements email and started editing. The $800 designer purse became a $400 alternative. The $1,000 iPad became a $500 tablet. Every item was cut exactly in half. Here, I said, showing David my revised list. This is what we're doing. He looked uncertain. Sarah won't be happy. Sarah's never happy, I pointed out. But this is still generous. When the gifts were delivered, the reaction was exactly what I expected. Sarah called David in tears, and Linda left a scathing voicemail about cheap knockoffs. At the next family dinner, they both shot daggers at me with their eyes. I just don't understand why you couldn't get the items I specifically requested, Sarah sniffed. I gave her my sweetest smile. Oh, but didn't you know? It's not about the price tag, it's the thought that counts. We put a lot of thought into choosing these alternatives. The look she gave me could have curdled milk. A year passed in this strange dance of passive-aggressive gift-giving and tense family dinners. Then came the Easter gathering that would change everything. Sarah waited until everyone was seated at the table, then stood up with what she clearly thought was a radiant expression. I have wonderful news, she announced. We're expecting baby number 3. The fork stopped halfway to my mouth. I felt David stiffen beside me. A 3rd child, with no income and no home of their own. My mind spun with calculations of how much more this would add to our monthly family support payments. Mike, predictably, didn't look up from his phone. Linda, however, was ecstatic. "Oh, my darling," she cried, hugging Sarah. "This is wonderful news. 3 beautiful grandchildren." Then she turned to me, her eyes glittering with malice. "You should take notes, Rose. Sarah is such a wonderful example of a real woman. Here she is about to have her 3rd child, while you still haven't given David any." The room went quiet. I could feel everyone's eyes on me, waiting for my reaction. I set down my fork carefully, making sure my voice was steady when I spoke. "I believe in doing things in the right order," I said coolly. "First, build a stable foundation, like having our own home and being able to provide for our children without depending on handouts. Then start a family." Linda and Sarah exchanged looks before breaking into artificial laughter. "Oh, Rose," Linda said condescendingly, "you're so corporate. It isn't about money and houses." "No," I agreed, taking a sip of water. "It's about responsibility." The tension around the table was thick enough to cut with a knife, but I didn't care anymore. Let them laugh. Let them think I was cold and calculating. At least my future children would have a roof over their heads that nobody could take away. Sarah's 3rd baby arrived in September, another boy. Meanwhile, David and I had reached our savings goal. After months of house hunting, we finally found it, our perfect home. It was a beautiful 2-story colonial with 4 bedrooms, a spacious backyard, and a kitchen that made me want to learn to cook properly. It was in an excellent school district, just a 20-minute drive from work. We spent weeks planning renovations, picking paint colors, and choosing furniture. Every room held a promise. The sunny bedroom that would make a perfect nursery, the basement we could turn into a playroom, the office space where we could work from home when needed. Then came the dinner invitation from Linda. "Mom wants us to come over tonight," David said, checking his phone. "She says it's important." Something felt off about the invitation, but I couldn't put my finger on it. When we arrived, everyone was there: Linda, Sarah, Mike, and all 3 kids. They had this strange, almost smug energy about them. Sarah was practically bouncing in her seat, while Linda wore the self-satisfied smile I'd learned to dread. So Linda began after we'd settled in. "I hear congratulations are in order. You bought a house." I nodded, still riding the high of our achievement. "Yes, we just closed last week. It's perfect for—" Linda cut me off. "That's actually what we wanted to discuss." She folded her hands on the table like a business executive about to close a deal. "You and David are still young, no children yet. You can continue living in your apartment just fine." I felt my smile freeze. What was she getting at? "But Sarah, my poor girl, has 3 beautiful children cramped up in this house. They need space to grow, a yard to play in." Linda's voice dripped with false concern. "So we've decided that you should give your new house to Sarah and her family." I stared at her, waiting for the punchline. But Linda's face remained serious. Sarah was nodding enthusiastically, while Mike finally looked up from his phone, showing interest for the first time in months. "I'm sorry, what?" I managed to say, looking between them. "You want us to give away our house. The house we spent years saving for." Sarah leaned forward. "I'm a mother of 3, she said, as if that explained everything. "I have a right to provide my children with proper living conditions. You can always buy another house later." I turned to David, my heart pounding. "Are you hearing this? Do you finally see how entitled they are?" Before David could respond, Linda's smile widened. "Oh, sweetie," she said, her voice sickly sweet. I raised my son right. He knows where his loyalties lie, with his mother and sister. Isn't that right, David?" Bang! David's fist came down on the table so hard the dishes rattled. He shot up from his chair, his face flushed with anger I'd never seen before. Linda and Sarah actually flinched, their smug expressions dissolving into shock. "That's enough." David's voice boomed through the room. Even Mike dropped his phone. "I have sat here for years watching you manipulate and guilt me. I've supported you financially, emotionally, constantly. I've given you money while you," he pointed at Mike, "sit around playing video games all day. I've listened to you insult my wife, belittle our choices, and demand more and more." Sarah started to say something, but David interrupted her. "No, you are not allowed to speak at this time. Can you imagine the amount of money I have given you throughout the years? Innumerable thousands of dollars. And you have the gall to want our house now." Linda attempted to interrupt. "David, sweetie." "Don't sweetie me, Mom." David lost his temper. "You believe you raised me correctly. Telling me it's acceptable to steal from family members. That it's okay to demand that people vacate their residence." There was no humor in his laughter. "You know what? In fact, you raised me correctly. Enough to realize at last how poisonous this whole situation is." He took hold of my hand and dragged me out of my seat. "We're finished. This is all over. No more cash. No more presents. No more deceit. Look for another person to serve as your ATM. But the children," Sarah broke down in tears, "should be your and Mike's responsibility." David said, "Not mine, not Rose's. Yours." He dragged me toward the entrance while still holding my hand. "Avoid calling us. Avoid texting us. Please refrain from sending us your demand lists. We're finished." Their astonished, incredulous looks were the last thing I saw before we departed. David virtually rushed to the car, jumped in the driver's seat, and helped me get in. I was unable to control myself as we moved away from the curb. I took hold of his face and gave him a passionate kiss. I muttered, "I love you," against his lips. "I'm so proud of you." I could feel him trembling a little as he gave me a close embrace. "I should have done that years ago," he said. "I'm sorry it took me so long to stand up to them." The weeks that followed were filled with frantic attempts to get in touch. Threats and tears alternated as Linda called nonstop. In her long texts, Sarah claimed that we were destroying her family. Distant cousins who were flying monkeys called to complain about our cruelty. David, however, remained steadfast. We concentrated on settling into our new home while he banned their phone numbers and unfriended them on social media. We created a garden, purchased furniture, and painted walls. I saw the burden of his family's manipulation diminish with each day that went by. David leaned across the table and grasped my hand one morning when we were enjoying coffee in our lovely kitchen and discussing turning one of the bedrooms into a nursery. "Thank you," was all he said, "for assisting me in discovering my spine, for demonstrating to me what a true family ought to be, for bearing with me as I worked everything out. I can't help but smile as I sit in our comfortable living room and type this. The family you were born into may not always be the one you deserve. You have to construct your own sometimes, and we're doing just that. One dream at a time, one room, one day." In front of me, on the coffee table, are the samples of nursery paint. Our initial consultation with the fertility doctor is scheduled for tomorrow. Although it's our life, it's not flawless, and it's the only thing that counts.